We're going to learn about population patterns, but this time on a small scale. Last time we were talking about chapter 9.1, and we were talking about sort of broad continental scales of patterns. Now we're going to look within a population, the scales. This is from the Ecology Concepts and Applications textbook by Molles and Sher that was published by McGraw Hill in 2019. So it's the 8th edition. And we're going to talk about desert shrubs, but we're also going to talk about tropical bees as examples today. So we already talked about last presentation distribution limits. Now we're looking at distribution patterns on small scales. Now, when we're looking at these patterns, we tend to classify them just to simplify how we're thinking about them. And looking at patterns, we can see that you could have just things that are distributed across a landscape randomly, which means you have an equal chance of finding an individual of that species anywhere. You usually find random distributions if there's a uniform distribution of resources, so you can find what you need everywhere. You're not particularly competitive. You're not grouping together. If you've got the plants or animals equally spaced, so they're evenly spaced out or uniformly spaced, we call that a regular distribution. And that's often something that is in some way very territorial or very competitive, where they want exclusive use of the area. So it could be a nesting bird and it's maintaining a territory so it gets enough food for its young. And a uniformly spaced or regular distribution, so this could be called a uniform distribution or a regular distribution, the individuals tend to avoid one another. And then we have the opposite end of that. We have a clump distribution where you have some places where you've got everybody packed together, and in other places there's nobody. So there's something attracting individuals, whether they like each other or they like a certain resource. They might be around the watering hole, or they might be around a food source. Or else they might be looking for each other for safety or looking for each other for mating purposes. When we look at these simple patterns of random, regular, and clumped, and visually you can clearly see the difference between them, that when we look at the regular ones, which is in the middle of the picture, they are just equal spaces between them. They're all nicely spaced out. Each one has its own territory. So this could be desert shrubs that are taking the water from the area around each individual, or this could be an aggressive species that is fighting for its territory so it can have its resources. The opposite extreme would be the clump distributions, where you have groups of the organisms, and then you have other places where there's nothing, and there's some sort of attraction to each other or some sort of attraction to a common resource. And between those two extremes, and I would say the random distribution is between regular and clumped. So there's really a continuum. It's not like three separate groups, but you go from regular to random to clump distributions. And with the random distributions, some things are looking like they're evenly spaced, some things are clumped together. There's some open spaces, there's some clump spaces, there's some regular spaces. It's just all at random. So anybody has an equal chance of getting any place in the environment. So really the interactions between individuals or between individuals in the local environment are not that important in determining their distribution. So I would start with this really cool example with Stephen Hubble and Leslie Johnson's work on social interactions causing spacing in a population of stingless bees, well, different species of stingless bees. They looked at this in the tropical dry forest in Costa Rica. And even though these bees don't sting, they do attack each other. They can be aggressive. And there's all sorts of different species. They live in the trees, and they could be a colony with hundreds to thousands of workers. And so Hubble and Johnson would go out every morning and take a look at them and see what they were doing. And they saw that some were non-aggressive and some were very aggressive. So knowing what we know about these different patterns, they predicted that the aggressive bees would be in a regular distribution, a uniform, evenly spaced distribution, and then the non-aggressive bees would be either random, because there's no interaction, or clumped for some reason. So what did they find? As predicted, the 4 species with regular distributions, so they're evenly spaced, were the highly aggressive ones. And then they had another species, a 5th one, that was non-aggressive, and it was randomly distributed. The bees were marking possible sites with pheromones so that they could sort of pick out where they wanted to live. And then if different populations wanted the same site, then they would actually, these aggressive species would then fight for the pheromone marked site. So here we see the visual version of this for the figure out of your book. So this is looking at regular and random distributions of stingless bees. And the ones on the left are your aggressive species. And they are, it's one aggressive species that is spaced out quite evenly in the forest. And the one on the right is in a random distribution, and that is a less aggressive stingless bee. So this is the non-aggressive stingless bee on the right. The one on the left, they actually observed these colonies battling for 2 weeks to get an individual nest site. So these were protracted sites. This is from your textbook. I think this is a fascinating paragraph. So this is about basically these stingless bee warfare, which is an interesting area to research. And it says in your textbook, if workers from 2 different colonies arrive at the prospective nest site, they may fight for possession. Fights may be escalated into protracted battles. They observed battles over a nest tree that lasted for 2 weeks. Each dawn, 15 to 30 workers from the 2 rival colonies arrived at the contested nest site. The workers from the 2 rival colonies faced off in 2 swarms and displayed and fought with each other. In the displays, pairs of bees faced each other, slowly flew vertically to a height of about 3 meters, and then grappled with each other to the ground. When the 2 bees hit the ground, they separated, faced off, and performed another aerial display. The bees did not appear to be injured in these fights, which were apparently ritualized. The 2 swarms abandoned the battle around 8 or 9 o'clock each morning, only to reform and begin the next day just after dawn. While this contest over an unoccupied nest site produced no obvious mortality, other fights over occupied nests sometimes killed over 1,000 bees in a single battle. These tropical bees space their colonies by engaging in pitched battles. So they're capable of killing each other, but they had the system worked out where they would not kill each other to fight over a site. I don't know how they organized this, how they knew, okay, we're going to meet dawn tomorrow. We're going to stay there for a couple hours and then, go about our day, and then we'll come back the next day. I think that was fascinating. I wanted to get you some video of this. I can't find any video of this. If you can find some video of this, please send me the link, because I would really like to see some videos of these bees doing this. When I was looking for videos of it, warfare and stingless bees seemed to be my most successful search. I could find some articles where they were had some photographs like this one. There's a link to a BBC News article, but I could not find any good video for you. So as exciting as bees fighting, who doesn't want to see a desert shrub fight? Um, and when we look at desert shrubs, we see that they're usually all nicely, evenly spaced out. And it makes sense, you know, they have to get water, they're competing for water. And when you saw that video last time of Tony going through the Mojave Desert, you could see the shrubs were all kind of spaced out because of competition. However, things are a little less straightforward than we thought. Uh, Phillips and McMahon found a distribution of desert shrubs changed as they grew. So when they were little baby shrubs, they were all clumped together, and then they would be spaced out as they grow, as members of the clump would disappear. So they might be clumped because it's a good safe site. So it might be a spot that is has a little bit of extra moisture there, or some leaf litter, some reason that the little babies are able to start to grow. It might be that the parent plants are not very good seed dispersers, so they just kind of land near the parent, so you get a lot of babies near the parent. Or it could be the parent is not even producing seeds, it's sending out runners. So it's cloning itself, asexual reproduction. And so the young ones are going to be near each other because they're all close to the. Here's what it tends to look like then after they have grown up. This is a brittle bush. This is Laria tridentata, which was also one of the plants you saw in that video last time from the Mojave. And it does look like things are very evenly spaced out. But when the shrubs are young, they'll be clumped together and they have to compete for water as they get bigger. And as they're competing for water, some of them are just not going to make it. And so the ones that are making it will end up being regularly spaced. So they go from being clumped to being random to regular over their life. So Phillips and McMahon proposes plants grow, some individuals and the clumps die, reducing the clumping. The competition among the remaining plants produces higher mortality, and eventually that's going to create distribution. So if we sort of look at these little seedlings, maybe we have the mother plant here, and it might be that her little babies are all kind of growing near her, direction the wind was blowing, or she's sending out clones. And as these babies get bigger, some of them are just not going to make it. And so some of them are going to be dying. And then eventually they're going to just keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And it might be that this guy doesn't make it. So they're going to end up with the ones that make it are going to be spaced out rather evenly, even though it was clumped in the beginning. You can have the same thing happening here. Maybe this guy makes it and this guy makes it, but it's going to be not that whole clump over there that's going to make it. This is their picture of it, which I think makes a lot more sense. The small shrubs establish in high densities and produce a clump distribution. So on the left side, we've got the little clumps of the baby shrubs. As they start to compete with each other, some of them are disappearing. So as they're getting bigger, your population density is dropping. And so now we've become a random distribution in the middle. And then with more mortality, with more competition, you end up with them all nice and evenly spaced out, which is the last regular distribution of the large shrubs. So even though you notice the big ones in the pictures, you see just the large ones. You don't often see this progression from the small ones to the large ones. In order to look at how this competition is occurring, what the mechanism of the competition is, this is looking at when they dug down to look at the root systems. They were looking at 32 different root systems of these. This was in the Jornada long-term ecological research site which is in New Mexico in the Chihuahuan Desert. This was a different study. It was a study in the 90s. This would be hot work digging down to excavate these roots. It took them 2 months to do this. And then they could look at where the overlap in the roots were. So on the left, you can see where they've excavated the roots of individual shrubs. You can kind of see the center points. When they map just with circles, just like I drew on there, just with circles from each individual shrubs, you would think that that overlap, and remember this is three-dimensional, so we've got this one might have deeper roots than that one. So when you actually look at where the roots overlap in the second picture, they are shown in the blue color where the overlap would be hypothetically if it was just a circle of roots from the plant. In reality, they stagger the roots in different layers of the soil enough that they are not overlapping. They're overlapping in very small spots, which was about 4% of the area, as opposed to the hypothetical would have been, if it was just kind of growing from a circle, would have been 20% of the area. So they have greatly reduced their water competition by layering the roots in higher and lower spots. At the end of this chapter, you're in concept 9.2 review questions, and you should be able to answer questions 2 and 3. Question 2 is, how could you test the hypothesis that low overlap in root systems in creosote bushes, so this particular figure, is a result of ongoing competition? And then there's also a question there about the bees. And one of the things they did with the bee study is they tried to figure out maybe the distribution of the bees is not because of the aggressiveness, but maybe it was because of where the nesting sites are. Maybe the nesting sites are in a regular distribution or a uniform distribution. And so why did they measure the number and distribution of potential nest trees? So that was an important step. So read back over the bee study and the shrub study. Next presentation, we're going to be continuing on looking at patterns of distribution, but now we're going to move on to looking at patterns on large scale. So see you there.